You've also done a lot of work with veterans. You've stayed close to the men who were in Restrepo. Can you talk about the work you've done? And Sergeant Brendan O'Byrne, who's such an amazing character in the film, how is he doing today, and how are other members of that unit doing?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of stayed close to some of the guys, closer to some than others, depending on who I was close to out there. A lot of them stayed in. A lot of them joined the Army because they wanted to be soldiers, and they're still soldiers, and some of them got out. I'd say probably half stayed in. Brendan was the first one to get out. He was the only one to get out after the deployment in the chronicle. And he did much worse than everyone who stayed in. I mean, psychologically, emotionally, I think he had a much harder time than the guys who stayed in. He really kind of crashed and burned. But he also had issues. I mean, if you read my book, War, you'll know, like, he had issues going in, a lot of issues. And sometimes what happens is that those issues get suspended for the deployment, and then you get out, and if you have a drinking problem, that resumes. It's like all the problems that you sort of escaped from while you were sitting on a ridge top in Afghanistan for a year, all those problems jump on you when you come back. And it's not necessarily the effect of combat. Sometimes it's just your life catching up with you. And that was a little bit that way with Brendan. But he's doing great now. He lives in Massachusetts. I used to be an arborist. I was a climber for tree companies. I took trees down, on a rope up in the air with a chainsaw. And I taught Brendan how to do that. So I was doing that before I went to Bosnia. And so he's great. He's a great climber. He's better than I ever was, I think. And he gives talks about veterans issues. He just came back from Sweden, talking to the Swedish military about PTSD and about combat.
And this is my last question, how are we doing as a country in terms of these veterans? It's an all-volunteer military. I think the number is 1% of the American population serves in the military or is impacted by these more than a decade of wars that we've fought. You hear about terrible suicide rates and PTSD rates. Are we helping them?
That 1%'s fine, I think. It's how we relate to that 1%. I mean, we don't need a 5 million person army. You know what I mean? Like and mostly we couldn't afford it. I mean, the biggest limiting factor on the size of the army isn't manpower. It's actually we can't pay for it. We have the army that we can afford right now, and so the trick is, the people who serve are never going to be a majority of the country, right? And so the trick is to relate to that 1% and make them feel like included in this country. And what happens with soldiers is they come back. Brendan said this to me. He said one of the things that really troubled him was the idea that he might have killed civilians. It really burdened him, And he'd come back and people would say, he'd try to talk about that, and people would say, don't worry about it. You did your job. You did your duty. Welcome back. Thank you for your service. You're a hero. And he's like, listen, this isn't my war. You guys sent me. And even the people who were against the war helped pay for it. It's not my war. Like, why won't you have a conversation with me about killing? Because that's what war is. It's killing. And the people who kill come back with some moral burdens. And they should be shared by everybody because we all killed. Like if a country goes to war, everyone in that country helped kill. That's the sort of emotional truth of the matter. And veterans do not understand that they come back from the war and everyone's like, oh, we don't really want to talk about this. Thank you for your service. It drives them crazy. And I think one of the things we really have to do is kind of as civilians, as citizens, is own the war. And that applies just as much to people who were against it as who were for it. It was our war. We paid for it. Our government chose to do it. And in Afghanistan, I mean, I was totally against Iraq, completely against Iraq. But young Americans came back with an experience over there, and I'm an American, and my country went to Iraq, and I feel like I should be willing to have any conversation they need to have about it. I don't know how you quite do that in a formal way. One idea I had, I've been working with a wonderful author named Karl Marlantes, a Vietnam vet, amazing guy, amazing author. He wrote a book called Matterhorn, another book called What It's Like to Go to War, what it feels like to go to war. Incredible book, incredible man. Anyway, we had this idea, like suppose, like, you know, Veterans Day can sometimes feel like a somewhat empty, like, formality. Suppose on Veterans Day, when someone says, I support the troops, it means that you go to the town hall in whatever city or town you live in, and all the young people who served in the wars, who are from your town, have the chance, they don't have to, but they're given the town hall is made available to veterans for an entire day, 1 day a year on Veterans Day, to come talk about what it was like to their whole town. And if you support the war, if you support the troops, it's your job to go listen. And they might get really angry. They might get teary and say that they miss their brothers. They might say, I'm incredibly proud. They're going to say a whole range of things, but we really should be able to hear them out. And I think the therapeutic value of that would be incalculable. It would be worth years of therapy. Something like that, I think, would be tremendously good for this country.